Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Uma Naidoo. She's a nutritional psychiatrist, and she wrote the book, This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more. And she wrote the Kevin MD article, Can What You Eat Worsen Your ADHD? Uma, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I really am excited to be here and talk with you.
So we'll get into your article and book in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Thanks, Kevin. I'd be happy to. I wish, Kevin, that I could say I had a grand plan and all these goals, but I really didn't. I followed things that I loved to do. I knew early on that I really enjoyed working with people, and psychiatry seemed like a natural fit. And I came from a very large South Asian family, so food and nutrition was always a big part of it because there were many physicians in the family. And so my love for food and cooking, I carried with me when I started training. But here's the fun part. I really didn't know how to cook because there were always too many cooks in the kitchen, mothers, grandmothers, and aunts. So I really learned to cook when I was in residency, and it became a real part of mindful practice for me, something I enjoyed in a creative space. So I decided that I wanted to incorporate just learning more about nutrition and working on that with patients. My trip to culinary school was really about honoring my food hero, Julia Child, because when I heard that she did this as a second career and later in life, I thought, why not me? Once I learned to start cooking, I really began to enjoy it and I wanted to learn more. And in a very wonderful way for me, these elements of what I studied came together in the work that I do and evaluations that I was doing for patients, really trying to have more of a holistic and integrated functional approach to mental health and not just relying only on medications. I do prescribe medications and still do, but really looking at an out-of-the-box way to offer people more solutions. And that's how I came to do my work.
Excellent. And you are a nutritional psychiatrist, and that sounds like a perfect combination of your passion. So tell me a little bit more about how does one become a nutritional psychiatrist?
It's a very nascent field, Kevin. For decades, mentors of mine at Mass General have studied folate and methylfolate and omega-3 fatty acids. But when we think about how we eat, we never just eat one ingredient. And any ingredient that you eat has so many nutrients, minerals, vitamins, fiber, and tons of things in it. So in the last decade or so, nutrition and mental health has been more formalized as a field of nutritional psychiatry. There are research groups all over the world. And so there isn't yet a formal fellowship training, although I do feel that people are so interested and want to learn more about how to incorporate this into their practice that we're currently working on a course for clinicians, as well as considering one just to help with people asking about how they can learn more should they not be able to see such a doctor. So I incorporated this into my practice, incorporated the things that I'd studied, and really designed my own evaluation that I do with individuals based on the research that I've done for my book, which I'd been doing for a while, looking at the nutrients and the foods to either embrace for a certain condition or foods to avoid for a certain condition.
So one of the conditions that you talk about is ADHD, and let's talk about that Kevin MD article, Can What You Eat Worsen Your ADHD? Now, for those who haven't read your article, can you walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to focus on this?
Absolutely. I was thinking, Kevin, about what would be appropriate for this time of year with the pandemic ongoing and schools being uncertain and whether we're returning or not. I felt that, parents were struggling or maybe facing difficulties around taking care of their children at home. And if a child were to have symptoms of ADHD, just to make them aware of certain things in our diets that could drive certain symptoms, because studies have shown that categories of foods with gluten or certain types of dairy, A1 dairy from cow milk, could worsen symptoms. Added sugars. I know that with sugar, many parents will attest to this if they've taken their kids to a birthday party or, at Halloween, for example. So I thought that there were two things that seemed to make this article timely. One was return to school, and the other was the Halloween holiday coming up.
When you're talking about dairy, sugar, gluten, these are foods that a lot of kids eat. So how
Yeah.
much is a dangerous amount? How much is an amount that would manifest in potential symptoms of ADHD?
Sure. So basically, I think what a parent should watch for is, the child may not have celiac disease, but they might have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And so if they're noticing a change in behavior, a worsening of symptoms, when they say having their lunch sandwich or having a pizza, something that contains gluten, I would start paying attention to the behaviors that the parent might be noticing or the child might be reporting. And start to slowly eliminate that particular ingredient or, that food from their diet and see if the symptoms improve. With dairy, it's really the kind of dairy because there are now A2 milks on supermarket shelves. So it could be that, if the child is responding to, say, they're having a milk drink in the morning or some other type of beverage that contains milk, and the parent is again noticing something different, or maybe the child is not coping with their assignment that morning for school, if they're doing it, virtually from home, then again, it might be a simple thing like replacing the type of milk and seeing if the child does better. They don't have to give it up. I really try as much as possible, Kevin, not to have people eliminate foods unless they're experiencing real symptoms or there's a food allergy or food intolerance. And when it comes to sugar, not all the studies showed an association, but I also felt putting it in context was important because not only of what parents report, what I've seen in my clinical practice, that it seemed to be a no-brainer, in addition to the fact that we know added sugars are just not good for our brain in general. And studies have shown this. There's an increased association with depression and anxiety, for example, and it worsens symptoms of ADHD. So, I think that it's more about cutting back on the amounts of those foods if a parent is noticing an uptick of symptoms, and maybe slowly, switching to a different form or different snack or a healthier version of food that may help them with the symptoms, or switching out the milk, for example.
And how long would you expect any type of behavioral change that can result from this potential change in diet?
I've seen these types of dietary changes take a few weeks. I've also seen, and this is much related to the mostly unique microbiome that we each have. So I've also seen adults do better within about a week of just cutting out something that was driving a symptom. And I would imagine the same. I'm not a child psychiatrist, but I would imagine the same in children as well. Certainly parents report that to me. So I would definitely give it a try and see how the child does, and maybe try to switch out some healthy alternatives of what they eat. So an ice cream could be replaced with a recipe in my book, which is made from bananas. And you can make a really great chocolate flavored ice cream by adding super dark cacao, which is natural and has tons of flavonoids for your brain. So you could make that the ice cream alternative, and child still has a scoop of ice cream, and skip the processed ice cream that is in the freezer.
So I'm a primary care and internal medicine physician. I see a lot of depression and anxiety in my clinic. Now, what are some nutritional connections between those conditions?
Okay. So in depression, I think that it's some building blocks around, say, things like omega-3 fatty acids. So we know that there have been a good number of trials of things like salmon, if you do eat fish, but if you're plant-based, there's short chain ALA in things like chia seeds, flax seeds, in sea vegetables and algae. So there's a way that you could still get omega-3s that way. We also have things like prebiotic and probiotic rich foods actually help symptoms, mostly because of the fiber and the culture, the bacteria that they bring back to the microbiome. Those are just some examples. And then, there were spices that people often overlook. Turmeric and saffron hit the high notes in terms of trials in depression. So I would at least start with some of those building blocks. And then with anxiety, I find, Kevin, that it's really important for people to know things to stay away from.
Mm-hmm.
One is, you're not going to be surprised by, it's the added sugars, but another is artificial sweeteners, and they actually worsen anxiety. A third is processed vegetable oils. So, if you're eating fast foods or you're eating out a lot, restaurants, not all restaurants, but some restaurants tend to use these processed vegetable oils because they're inexpensive, and that could be worsening your symptoms as well. In terms of improving your symptoms, omega-3s are great. There's certain great polyphenols and certainly fruit and vegetables that are great. Magnesium and zinc are great. You can get them from food sources or, speak to your doctor about supplement. And, again, turmeric with a pinch of black pepper. You always add a pinch of black pepper to turmeric, Kevin. In fact, I keep my glass jar of turmeric and I grind in some black pepper because the black pepper makes the turmeric, the curcumin, more bioactive to your body and brain. So it's just worth doing that for yourself.
We're talking to Uma Naidoo. She's a nutritional psychiatrist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Can What You Eat Worsen Your ADHD? Uma, I have a lot of clinicians, both specialists and primary care physicians who listen to this podcast. Now, we all don't have the nutritional expertise like you do. Now, what are some messages and lessons that you could share with my audience?
Sure. Kevin, I often get asked this question, and even though it may seem very rudimentary or very straightforward, sometimes it's those basic building blocks of a good and healthy diet. I think everyone is trying their best. I think the pandemic has been hard, and resetting would be helpful for all of us, but it goes back to some simple things. And here's why. Things like where we get our fiber from fruit and vegetables, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, lentils, healthy whole grains, those feed the microbiome. They feed the 39 odd trillion bugs in our microbiome. So those are good basic things to start eating. With fruit, I generally suggest lower glycemic fruit like berries, blueberries, strawberries, blackberries. But a healthy abundance of vegetables in your diet is helpful for that. And then in terms of proteins that you eat, it should be well sourced. So, and certain types of lean protein associated with improvements in mood. So I think that starting off there, and then things like prebiotic and probiotic rich foods and eating the color of the rainbow. While they seem straightforward, these are all related to good science. They're also related to things like the amount of polyphenols and the different colors of the fruit and vegetables, in addition to the fact that those fruit and vegetables and the polyphenols bring back good antioxidants to your brain. They're manufactured and processed in the gut and are really healthy ultimately for reducing inflammation and then preventing the onset of things like neuroinflammation, which is what could lead to depression and other mental health symptoms. So things like your leafy greens, your colorful vegetables, the folates in leafy greens are associated with certain bacteria in the microbiome, which actually will help to improve mood over time. Pre and probiotic foods, super healthy for your brain health, omega-3s, and good sources of fiber. And all of those really almost, I talk about a philosophy of eat the orange, skip the store-bought orange juice, because it's about the whole healthy food and the nutrients, and skipping the processing, the added sugar from the orange juice. And if we start with those basic tenets and then go into specific foods for each condition, I really have seen people start to feel better. I know that many doctors listening to this may have patients roll their eyes about, why are you asking me to eat a salad again? But there's actually a good amount of evidence behind, the Mediterranean diet and depression, and those types of diets are really rich in fresh vegetables and fruit and that type of stuff.
So you're also the author of the book, This Is Your Brain on Food. Can you share a little bit about that book and where can people find it?
Thank you so much, Kevin. So the book was released in August. It's available at all major bookstores or online. And I'd love for it's basically not necessarily about having a diagnosis. It's about eating better for your better brain health. So it walks you through different mental health conditions and the symptoms someone might experience based on case studies, and also the research of foods to embrace or foods to avoid for each condition, with recipes in chapter 11 for you to try. And it's I would love for people to follow me on social because we always put out updated scientific information and interesting stuff that I think you might enjoy. And my handle is at Dr. Uma Naidoo, at DRUMANAIDOO. And I would love it if we heard from your listeners.
And my final question, what is your take-home message they want to leave with my audience?
I would say a really healthy way to get started in improving your diet is that there's several spices that hit the high notes in certain conditions. If you don't cook with turmeric and a pinch of black pepper, add it to a soup, a smoothie, or a tea. Embrace spices because you can eat a ton of different roasted vegetables and different proteins of your choice, and change that up for your entire family just by changing out the spices, which are sugar-free, calorie-free, and otherwise pretty healthy for you to eat. They also are cost-effective because they last a long time. I would encourage people to embrace spices to make your food more interesting, because healthy food doesn't have to not be tasty. It should be delicious too.
Uma, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Kevin. It was a pleasure.